It's the final episode. So hi everyone, my name is Adama, and it's the final episode of my Bench to Bedside series. And in this episode, we're talking about research funding. It's really been so much fun doing this series, and thank you to everyone that's watched so far and has said something nice. So for this episode, we're talking about what keeps science going, so the money side of it. What determines what is funded? Where does the money come from? So a really quick reminder, Bench to Bedside is what is translational work, often referred to in the science community. So work referring to stuff done in the lab, like figuring out theories, how stuff work, and then following that impact onto patients directly. So my stance on the research community is that it is flawed by default, and for people looking from the outside in, so let's say you don't really engage with research, it's kind of hard to conceptualize what people or researchers do on a day-to-day basis, what does the money go towards, and how long it takes, because in the news maybe every 20, 30, 10 years if you're lucky, you hear like big breakthrough scientific research. So it's kind of hard to process what researchers do and where the money you even donate or the money they talk about, or why it takes billions to actually get something from the bench to the bedside. So of work, it's a lot of collaboration between different disciplines, trial and error, and pure determination on the scientist side that produces these results. So in all the episodes of my series that I've done, in my first one on male contraceptives, where we spoke about why there isn't a contraceptive, pharmaceuticals actually may not see the direct benefit of having or making male contraceptives. In my post about the African Genome Project, talking about sequencing human genomes and the impact that has, and how there's lack of African genome data and what African researchers are doing. So for African researchers, governments in many countries just don't see research as a priority, so there are no big budgets for research funding and allowing people to explore and learn these new things that other countries may have the opportunity to do. In my third episode on cardiovascular imaging is very expensive, the equipment is very expensive, MRI, ultrasounds, whatever, it's not cheap equipment. And to do research, sometimes you need the best of the best, but then to do diagnostic work, you kind of need to be able to use what is there. So there is this give of using what is available to you, but also pushing innovation. If there's no money, it's really hard to like push and make products better. In the most recent episode I've done on sickle cell, I highlighted the gaps and the importance of private funding. So the importance of having people come together and donate money for a specific cause and push the progress of that specific area. So using sickle cell as an example, it's a genetic disease, and another genetic disease is cystic fibrosis that receives 3 times the amount of funding when you compare it to sickle cell. So all these examples just show you the different realms or the different areas into which and why money is so important. Where does the money come from? I roughly put this into like 3 main areas. So large pots of money, private donations, and then finally big pharma. So large pots of money, these are huge pots of money where they're just there, and they're usually either given to researchers by the government, or they're given by these science institutions or academic institutions. So a perfect example of like a privately funded science institution is the Wellcome Trust. I have love for that place. I think it's amazing. The Wellcome Galleries are really cool. The work they do, the work they fund is amazing. And you will see the Wellcome Trust's impact across a range of countries. So now moving on to private donations. So recently is, if I can take you guys back to 2014 and the Ice Bucket Challenge. We remember people pouring buckets of ice on themselves, and the main purpose of this challenge was to raise money for a neurodegenerative disease called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, so ALS. So total, about $220 million was raised for ALS research, and that money was either directly stayed in the United States, but also charities such as the Motor Neuron Disease Association, I guess in the UK, also received funding or received money from that challenge. And while the challenge was focused on ALS, the impact of that challenge pushed into other areas of research where people saw the need to donate money for causes that they saw were most important to them. So to kind of like put into, I guess, I don't know, minds, or just talk about the direct impact that 220 million had, I went on the ALS website and decided to see where the money from that challenge and what direct impact that I could talk about had. So the money from that challenge, in total, they received about $115 million. And in the press release, there were a few take-home points I'm going to go through quickly. So one, they discovered 5 new genes connected to ALS, and that's amazing because by discovering new genes that connect you to a disease that is quite rare, you can earlier predict who would have the condition. And these people can have way better quality of life by knowing their diagnosis early, know how to maneuver through things very, very early, and don't have to have like unnecessary suffering by not knowing what is happening with their bodies. There was also increased local and international funding. So $90 million went to research within the US, while another $8 million went internationally. And millions of pounds and millions of grants is very impactful, and it's just amazing. And then through this increased local and international funding, there was also increased local and international collaborations. They bought new kit. It built one of the largest resources of ALS whole genome sequencing data, and they also expanded their clinical network, which means more people in the clinic knew about ALS, knew what to do for the condition, and therefore people received better care. So that's just a beautiful example of bench work just reaching people that can directly impact patients as well, because there is this there's sometimes this difficulty to translate from researchers just researching the condition to actually having an impact. Another more recent example of big private money having great impact is Dolly Parton donating $1 million to funding research that led to the development of the Moderna vaccine and the Moderna COVID vaccine. And in a full circle moment, she received the vaccine as well, which is really, really cool. But with private funding, those are the really, really good positive sides. And I guess the more controversial side is looking at a specific person, and this is looking at the impact of Bill Gates and his money. He's one of the richest men in the world, and he has great power when it comes to global health and community. And even at the beginning of the pandemic, there were there were people skeptical about his involvement, and specifically because one, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the second largest contributor to the WHO, and two, because their foundation is pushing the COVAX scheme, and they've had quite a lot of involvement within just the vaccination world. So the COVAX scheme, for people that don't know, is a scheme designed to give lower or countries without the funds or resources to have access to the vaccines. And while on one side that looks great, like yes, you're giving people the vaccines, which is good because people have received the vaccines and people are benefiting, but when you think of the, I guess, the other side of it, it goes into just the dangers of what were the other options. So yes, you're giving the people the vaccines, but are you only giving them in the way you want to give them and not the way that could be the best for them? Because we've had the conversation about the patents for the vaccines and making them, I think, making other companies be able to manufacture them at large scale and stuff like that, and all the legal stuff behind that. So I'm a global health expert, and I haven't been paying attention to Bill Gates until recently. So in a recent article I read by an author named Beauty, somebody I've also interviewed for my career profile, so it's really nice following up on her written work. She goes into the dangers of philanthrocapitalism, and which is a way of doing philanthropy which mirrors business models and for the for-profit world. And the article goes into discussing the very important issue around vaccines, intellectual property rights, and more. It also highlights the very serious points of having billionaires at the center table when it comes to public health decisions and just decisions about the entire world. So the truth about the research world is what is funded depends on who gives the money, and the less, I guess, biased the source of funding, may be the more impactful the work, but that's just me. Finally, my last point, I guess, would be on pharma companies and pharmaceuticals. So they fund their own research and development because they're always trying to figure out new ways to do new things. And yeah, but in pharma companies, profit is obviously still important. As I mentioned, if we go back, my male contraceptive video, some things won't be made if there is little to no monetary gain. I don't think I can deny that aspect of pharma, and how true it is, I don't work in it, so I won't know the full details. But you have these big pharma companies, and with them, even though they produce like a lot of good science and a lot of good work, there is mistrust between the public and scientists. Did a whole video on the public perception of science, and of course pharmaceutical companies come up a lot when talking about trust and science. I really wanted to keep this video short, and the research funding process, as I don't know if you've picked up from what I've said, it's very, very heavily skewed towards the West and Western money funding research that goes into countries across the world. You do see like heavy research power in other regions of the world, so India especially. So my first video on male contraceptives, the process I spoke about was or is being developed by an Indian researcher, and also India have really good manufacturing processes and manufacturing levels, if that's the right English, you know, they can manufacture. And then also China is like a really big powerhouse when it comes to science, and they are growing in terms of the science that they produce. And a way we've been able to see the countries that are kind of investing across areas of research are the countries that have been able to produce a COVID vaccine. And by just looking at that, unfortunately, Africa is poorly represented as a continent there. And what I mentioned before, just it's not a priority for a lot of governments, and it's slowly becoming a thing where you see more African researchers and seeing them take up space, and people take them very, very seriously and look at them first before you look at the Western world, you know? But Africa does have some positives, and South Africa were a major player in terms of genome sequencing and understanding the different COVID variants. So they are funding money, but we need to see funding across countries, across different countries on the African continent. There aren't huge pools of money, unfortunately, in Africa, and I don't know, it's just going to be something we'll have to see how it gets better and when it will get better. So yeah, to just end off this video, again, thank you to everyone that supported this series and just going through it. But the Bench to Bedside process was really just created to have like a meaningful dialogue between someone that really likes science and anyone that's interested to learn more, to know that science is not this overly complicated thing that you need to come and break your head for. It's calm, and you can approach researchers and just get answers to the questions you want to know. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it, and share to friends, family, and everybody.